So I'm going to now introduce Fiona York and her friend Drew, who is there. Hi, Drew. Drew just waved. Hi, Drew. So I'm just going to give a little background on Fiona and also Drew. So Fiona has worked in community services and nonprofit organizations for over 20 years, and for the past 13 years in the downtown East Side, and we're talking about Vancouver. For the past 5 years, she's provided frontline support and advocacy for tent cities in, said so-called Vancouver. I don't know if Fiona wrote that way, but and currently volunteers full-time for the encampment at Crab Park. She's employed as a support worker and is a board member of the Dugout, a drop-in center. And her friend Drew is a 45-year-old male that worked in the service industry most of his life. He studied natural sciences in university and found himself going from squatting to homeless to sheltering to tenting to housed during the pandemic. He became a key player during the transition from Strathcona to Crab Park and the establishment of the tent city, until being given housing at a hotel and then an SRO, where he continues to be an activist for better housing conditions and against the street sweeps. So Fiona and Drew, thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to you, and you guys just take it as you wish.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I just want to add, so it's actually probably closer to 6 years now that I've been involved with encampments. And the reason I mentioned that specifically is that in those 6 years and being involved with, I guess, 4 different encampments now, I've been able to see some of the patterns emerging, some of the changes in court cases and legislation, and the patterns across municipalities and connections to other encampments. And I've also been able to, because I work in a frontline capacity mainly as a volunteer, and I've been working with a lot of the residents of the encampments, I've also seen and found patterns and met people over and over. So I see kind of the cycles of people and some of the issues around when people do get housing from encampments, some of the issues with that. And so now I see not only issues around people living in encampments and conditions there and how they're being treated, but also some of the issues around housing. And so our goals now for me personally is not just about getting more housing and improved housing, but it's also what that housing looks like and how to make it successful for people, because I see so often just anecdotally and information from people that I work with that it's not working. People are cycling in and out and it's not successful for them. So as you probably know, we were in Crab Park. Now it's almost 3 years old. So I believe it's the longest running encampment in the country. It was the first one that became legally designated. And of course, I refer to the Valenti Court decision, which is really important and provided more of a kind of constitutional grounding for people living outside. But the court case at Crab Park came about after the first year. It's called the Bamberger decision, and very groundbreaking and a landmark decision, if we say so ourselves, following also on the Prince George decision in BC, our sister tent city, where they did, on the grounds of procedural fairness, did have the right to stay in the camp. And in Crab Park, it was basically rejecting an injunction attempt, but also setting aside some orders that would have seen people evicted from Crab Park and saying it's procedurally unfair, and really setting in these court cases the right for people to have a place to live outside, and also the access to housing that's not just housing that could be anything, but housing that's accessible and adequate. And so it gets into this whole conversation of what does housing look like, including people's voices, realizing the impact that some of these decisions have on people. And so a lot of what we talk about is really about including the voices of people who have the lived experience and people who are impacted by these decisions that are made in the courts or in the rooms of agencies or organizations or the legal system, without including people with lived experience. In this talk, I was asked to talk about what it's actually like in Crab Park and what it's like to live there. So I do want to talk about that a little bit, and I think it kind of reflects on what some of the earlier speakers talked about the relational needs, the relationship building, the social inclusion, and the needs for people to kind of have that social inclusion, because it really is a lot about building community, building trust with people who live in these communities. And it's kind of this untold story where people just think about a tent city or encampment and just think about all the kind of the narratives and the bad stories and people that live there, and they don't realize, like, now with Crab Park being almost 3 years old, there's been plenty of time in that 3 years to set down a lot of roots and put in some infrastructure and have programs in place. And the thing that I always talk about that's really striking is that there's no staff. Like, obviously there's the paid outreach workers that, the ministry workers and the government agencies that come in and offer housing, and people do access housing and access, healthcare and various services from the outreach workers, but there are no paid staff that work here. And this is a community that's averaged 60 to 100 people, so maybe 80 people over the 3 years. And it's the size of the average shelter. Like, a lot of shelters are around 40 to 60 people. So we're talking about a community the size of an average shelter. If you think about how much funding and how much staff would go into running a shelter for a year, probably 15 staff, and how many millions, like how much is put into that. And then we have this encampment that's running with a similar number of people staying alive and having food security, having access to programming and peer work and all of these things, but there's no funding except for what we as volunteers raise, like crowdfunding and tiny little increments of funding are able to put together, and the community support. It's very much community first, but we're able to provide. And I would say, because of my paid work life, I work in the system of shelters and agencies. I would say to some degree, it's better than what's provided in those through those agencies. It's it's very frontline, and really putting peers first and residents first. So peers are supporting one another, working with one another. There is a kitchen program at Crab Park, so there's food security. There are meals that are delivered by organizations, but there actually is a kitchen tent, and we have a camp cook. So one of the residents who functions as a cook and makes meals for people. We have an overdose prevention program. Again, it's a peer witnessing, so peers are employed to be part of that program and help monitor for each other. We hold meetings once a week, so people are updated on both internal camp issues, but also kind of what's going on in the outside world and all these patterns and the connections. We've done consultations. We met with the federal housing advocate in that review that a couple of people talked about, the report that just came out. So we met in person. We had a series of meetings at the Pivot office. Somebody else mentioned we did a consultation recently on the Provincial Policing Act and the legislation around that. We've done a consultation on the Poverty Reduction Plan, consultations and interviews that go up to the housing minister. We're sponsoring a film on Sunday. We do a lot of about the tiny home community, tiny homes that were in Toronto. So we do make a lot of these connections, and people are very politically aware and engaged. And the meetings, I was actually kind of surprised, like when we started doing them, and Drew is actually usually our chair, so he can talk more about that. When we started doing them, I thought it wasn't something, we'd have to kind of like really, encourage people to attend the meetings, but it's the opposite. I find that when we stop doing meetings, when we miss a couple of weeks, the people are getting mad and they're like, where's the newsletter? Where's the meeting? Like, how come we're not having meetings? And they really want it. People really want to engage and they want to be part of their community. And it really is run by the residents. And so this is where it kind of just gives me hope that we want to change. Hopefully, I think what we would like to do is change the face of how housing is delivered, and in terms of making it more accessible and more responsive to the voices of individuals, it would be looking at this peer model. How is it that Crab Park has existed for 3 years and be able to do this successfully, if not that residents actually can do this? The programs, we've done training, the street degree, which is related to overdose response. We just had 2 people graduate who are connected to Crab Park. So we have people like graduating from training programs. We have people who've gone through recovery. We have people who've had babies. We've had, not in the camp, but we've just had the whole family cycle. So all of these things, and I don't know if this is what you're talking about with natural supports, but I feel like it is this kind of like whole community where people form this community and help each other. And obviously there's lots of problems too and things happen, but it's really effective. And now we're going into a human rights case, which is talking about the amenities and services that should be provided. So if you're considering that encampments are kind of, maybe people don't want to see it this way, but they're here to stay until housing is being provided that is adequate. And so if it is here, then it has to be made habitable and sanitary. And so the human rights case is about providing those facilities and services that make it livable and make it possible for people to keep themselves clean and to minimize like infections or whatever is going on, and to just be sanitary, to have access to lighting and charging their phones and information, access to information, all of those things. And then just to leave space for Drew, I want to give a couple of like anecdotal stories. One is about when Jamie was talking about people having their stuff taken away. Just again, that instability. So now, of course, with the court case, people in Crab Park, it is a designated space. People can keep their tents up day and night. And so they do kind of put their roots down and have a place where they can stay day and night, and they don't have to keep moving away. But when that's happened, I've just seen myself as a as a frontline worker, how difficult, like people maybe in the camp, they start accessing some medical care and they're going for appointments, or they're getting regular dressing changes or treatment, or people are on medication and then they leave for whatever reason, like they're even though their tents are not supposed to be taken away. It's happened. We're actually like trying to track down tents now that were taken from the designated area. It's really, really difficult. And there's one person who was at the camp for like about 2 years, has not been back since his tent was taken away. One story I wanted to mention was somebody at the Strathcona tent city where they were accessing medical care. They had a round of antibiotics. And so because it's so chaotic, sometimes I was holding their medication and then helping them to take it every day. So I'd find them at the camp morning and night and make sure they took their medication. And then they left. And then I was like walking up and down the block and Hastings Street trying to find this person to give them their round of antibiotics. And of course, it was impossible. I couldn't find them. So that's the kind of destabilizing that happens when people are made to move and lose their tents, lose their whatever it is, like a little bit of grounding that they have, and they're like kind of accessing something and then they just lose it all. And the other example, it's a little bit hard to talk about, but just one example of sort of the community building and how independent and resilient the residents are. We had over 3 years, we haven't lost a lot of people, but we did lose somebody in the last couple of weeks. And their family came to see them yesterday.
Hmm.
And so the residents were able to organize a memorial wreath and took up a collection and had a card signed, and everybody participated. And I just found it was really, under the circumstances, that people were able to come together and to do that. The family was really touched by that. So just an example, there's so many others, but one kind of anecdotal example of the residents being able to kind of overcome the stigma of like, people in encampments and actually do these really, proactive and independent and looking after one another in their community.
Thank you for sharing that, Fiona. Like, I'm just overwhelmed by the amount of work that you do, and your involvement in the sharing of these stories are very informative, very helpful. And it's good to see, like, it's good for us to get a human face on the other side of it. And I'm especially thankful that Drew has agreed to come on and say a few words. I know this is difficult, but Drew, thank you for being here. And I'd like to turn it over to you to share.
Thank you. Can you see me, hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. I guess I'm a subject here, and you are also in the SRO right now. I'm in one of the top of the line SROs, I guess, whatever you call it. It's not called an SRO. I have a lease agreement. I'm going through trauma of that sort of it now, because I I am stubborn. I don't think that 15 degrees at night is a comfortable temperature. It's not even legal. But I've had them in here umpteen times about that and da 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 da. These battles that we fight for what seems logical, ethical, even in paper, pen and paper, text that says that this has to be a way. There's a lot of struggle for no good reason, it seems, when you are the subject. And so we're talking about like the housing thing. I think there was one part missing in my biography, and it was going from squatting to shelter to camp. And I got into a good shelter while after squatting. I was told of this through friends, some street, actually some in SRO I met through skateboarding friends, and they told me of this shelter. And I was squatting in a place in North Vancouver. Nice. I've lived in North Vancouver in my life. Da 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 da. I moved here in like '93 to Chilliwack, the Fraser Valley, and got to know Vancouver then. And after high school, I lived in North Van, and I've been to Europe for 10 years, came back and had some hardships of physical and financial, but I was living okay. But I was enjoying a summer life with these friends, and we went to this shelter, and it was one of the better ones. And ideally, through their like, I don't know, it's not a motto, but like the way of thinking it was like close to the Rain City kind of thing and stuff like that. They had good values, and feed you enough, let's say. The adequate housing kind of touch we're trying to go towards, in a way, it seemed like that. I went there, and it was quite good at first. The company has like housing units above that shelter, and the shelter fits the normal unit size and everything here. Like, it is a business. And people from in BC, they come out of jails and they don't know where to go. You have a fire in your house one night, you end up in these places. And as stated before by some of the people speaking, it was meant, emergency shelters are meant as emergency things. I have used them as emergency, but I stayed at this shelter for a year and a half. I don't know, it's just my taste or how things, you get jaded or whatever. And other things happen. I grew a dislike for it. Things were removed. It was during the pandemic thing. Things got tighter. We didn't have chairs. We're eating on the ground outside on concrete blocks. But while before, people were jealous of us in the shelter that lived upstairs because we'd sit as a community, because they gave us milk and cereal every couple hours. And it's like camp as a kid or something. And you know what? We did build a lot of bonds, and you did, kick your brother sometime or something or make fun of them. But it built a community. Like, even I talk about it where I'm in this great view of North Van. I don't know if you can see on there, and a great place here, but these are concrete walls. I can yell help right now and no one is going to come. But it's beautiful. I can listen to my music. I'm separated, as some of the people stated earlier too, or a different word for that. And that it has created and also lack of the system doing heat or different things that they're supposed to do. Elevator broken, or it's broken in my building. Oh, well, it's broken in mine too. These kind of things where professionalism seems to go out the window. I come from the hotel service industry, as you mentioned, and I think I did a good job at it. I'm privileged to have done that, but I don't see people meeting when they come in my door because the neighbor says that girls ODing in my room because they want their cat back, which I'm protecting from the hallway from the dogs. They know this. I don't know where the privacy starts and like rule of law begins, and I don't feel comfortable, but it's nonchalant. They just went to get the cat, like, I don't know. I've never lived in a walk of life where you can walk into a toilet and grab the cat and not say anything to the person on the toilet or whatever, I don't know. I wake up to this and they don't say sorry or anything, and they want to come and do room inspections. I'm sorry, I go on about these things. Point being, back in the thing is, I don't know what to trust about the system, and I don't want to endorse it for others if it's not good enough or if it's harmful. And I can understand when people don't want to live in the shelters. When I left that shelter, the good one at first, I said, for where I met Fiona at Strathcona Camp, which had not a notoriety at the time, 300 plus people living there. I went there for the good food, tell you the truth. We had a cook back there at that shelter for a while, but they had more, like, enough food. And I'm kind of athletic. I do skateboarding, I do basketball. But for anyone, people that have less athleticism in them need nutrients. And they're not getting this at these places. I have an industrial kitchen in the basement of or the floor level of this place, but we get one meal a day. And they have a catering business here, a social enterprise that benefits them. I can see the food. They take away half our cafeteria. We can see the food, but we can't have it. Like, these kind of things, you wouldn't picture it from another life. I don't come from like high middle class or whatever, but things worked out a little bit there, like you should. Here I don't know if it's a turn of events of things, of tide of society, but the kind of like, I think a lot of this starts, and we have care and talking about natural, but like supports and connections and that, and you can't put that on a pie chart, like, I'm sorry. I just think we have too many people are getting lost for lack of simple care. And I think we need to turn it a lot in the whole spectrum, I don't know, I can't say whole society, but I think it starts when like we take pleasure in others' demise and we create a superior, inferior, paradigm there. And it may be joyous or like funny or fun when we make fun of them when they fall, but it's only not funny when it happens then to you. And it is happening. These people are having hardships, financial or mental or whatever. And if we don't like look at them like Oscar the Grouch, like he's a funny, or Oscar the guy in the garbage can or whatever, like look with compassion, because a blind eye is 30 dead, and I know these places, shelters, they run on business and there's a demand. As long as there's demand, I looked at this like, and the homeless that they take all the tents from in Vancouver, 300, 500 people, whatever numbers you want to put on it. I say, we are on a tsunami evacuation route. Ask any other demographic of people, like we can't take care of 500. Are you telling me the city of almost 2 million does not have a plan? It does, I know. And I know of these places and some of them, but they're not being appropriated, I guess, to these people. And that's because the demographic, when the Winter's House building went caught on fire, one of our SROs, I saw it from here, and they put them in a Japanese hall, which is like a community center of sorts, on the floor. I'm like, what kind of job could I go to the next morning when someone took my left shoe or whatever? It's not dependable. They're not putting themselves in those shoes, like literally there. But I'm kind of jumping around a lot here, but the housing that even looks good here, people come by here and that, the system problems are the same throughout. I went to London, Ontario. I stayed in that shelter system, which puts you from 30 days to the other, but I was a working guy. They made benefits for me, But and there's more of a system in Ontario. I joined their welfare system for a month or two before I returned out here. And I don't know since COVID, but there's so much disarray out here, and like lack of culpability for negligence. It's rampant, and all the way down to what do you call it, like infestations, and then they blame it on the people that are in them. It's easy to, right? I've not kicked someone when they're down, I don't think, but like, you made fun of someone when they fall or something like that. And I see in this neighborhood, I can see pro-developer first. When I look at the law when I moved in here, because they're making noise in the city of construction at the time when I lived at the shelter, it said 8 or 8:30. I look up the law, the bylaws that are changing for this town are not for the people. It's 7 o'clock now, and then Monday to Saturday. Saturday is now the same as Monday to Friday because they're all developers. How much of this, all these, what's it called, like open market, like free market? There's no mandates for having social housing in all these constructed buildings. It just doesn't make sense. It's illogical, So I went to Strathcona, and then I had people like these peer observers, like I saw fighting for me that didn't know me. They're just these native group of youth. They hold a fire and stand up for people they don't know. I felt part of something, and I felt like there's hope or something like that. And they're fighting police with fisted cuffs. And I run out of my tent. I see this. I never see, that's amazing. That is the good light there.
Right.
And we all can do that. But it's very difficult in these positions. I'm sorry if it takes a little more time. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry for my demeanor.
No, Drew, that was very great for sharing. Look at you have something of value. You're sharing your experience with us and making us better informed. And we come away from a conversation with you. Well, not a conversation because it is one way, but you're taking time out of your day and you're sharing your experiences with us, and you're giving us more knowledge. And that's something valuable that you're embarking to us and sharing with us, and we really appreciate that. And I really get a sense of that concept of community, which, if I had to pick a word that was the theme of what you were saying, it's that community. Because, like you said, you can be in that room right now and yell help, and it's like four walls and no one's coming. But when you're at Strathcona, you can yell help, and you have a community of people that will come to assist you. So listen, Drew, thank you very much. It was a very welcome surprise and blessing for us to have you come and speak. And I want to thank you and Fiona from Vancouver for sharing with some of us here in Ontario. Thank you very much.